You are living in the most dangerous time in American history.
We won't take a single back step.
Former professional basketball player is now the Republican Party's choice.
Can you imagine Royce White, the U.S. Senate?
White won the endorsement on May 18th with 67% of the vote.
There's nothing that guarantees we win, but I guarantee you if we lose, we will die.
Thank you, Mrs. Heinerfeld. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're very pleased tonight to have two candidates for the Republican nomination for the presidency of the United States. Former Ambassador George Bush of Texas, former Governor Ronald Reagan of California. Gentlemen, before we begin, in response to the League of Women Voters announcement today that it will sponsor the presidential debates after the conventions, as it did 4 years ago in 1976, let me ask, if nominated by your party, would you agree to participate?
I'd love to debate in a rose garden. I think that would be an extraordinarily... Yes, sir, I would.
Thank you, Ambassador.
I can't wait.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. This evening's forum will last just 60 minutes. As you both have agreed, there will be no specific time limits to what you have to say. You'll have an open discussion on the issues. You can address comments and questions to one another. I will reserve the chairman's privilege of occasionally asking a question if I want to change the subject and think it's wise to do so. And towards the end of the forum, we will accept questions from the audience, and after that, there'll be brief closing statements by you. The first question, Ambassador Bush, everyone, including your opponent, has congratulated you on your stunning victory in Pennsylvania yesterday. In the course of the program Face the Nation on Sunday, you said you hoped to win because you had adopted the strategy of hammering away at the differences between you and Mr. Reagan. And one difference you mentioned was, you said in your words, was Mr. Reagan was over-promising the American people. Could you explain that? And when the spirit moves you, could you respond?
First, it was Meet the Press. I don't want to put in a plug for the wrong outfit. And secondly, I also made the point that what we must do is defeat Jimmy Carter. I mean, I got that into focus, and that I wanted to get these differences out with the governor so the voters could make a good determination. I hope that's what happened in Pennsylvania. A big difference, for example, that the governor and I have regards this tax cut. He feels, I don't want to put words in his mouth, and he's here to defend or explain his position, that you can cut taxes by $70 billion the first year. The Wall Street Journal attributed the figure to that tax cut idea to $90 billion the first year. Cut inheritance and gift taxes. We've computed that at $5.4 billion. And still balance the budget and still increase defense spending. President Kennedy suggested this cut. It was implemented by Johnson. The cut was $11.4 billion. It resulted in a $4.4 billion revenue loss. Inflation then was 1.8%. Today it's 18. Investor confidence was out there. Today there's none. So in my judgment, that economic program would exacerbate the deficit. It would result in less stimulation of the economy because of the conditions. And I believe that before we can have massive across-the-board tax cuts, we've got to get the budget in balance. So I am proposing a $20 billion, as opposed to 70 or 90, supply-side tax cut to stimulate savings for home, to stimulate business. That is a major difference. There's plenty of others, but I do want to give the governor a chance to respond.
Governor?
That is indeed a major difference, and I still believe firmly, and I think there are some differences of opinion about figures. 4 times in this century we have had across-the-board tax cuts, all of which have resulted in such an increase in prosperity that the government, even in the first year, got increased revenues, not less. In the Kennedy year, the total revenues for government, and of course government was much smaller then, about $109 billion instead of the 600 that will be coming up in '81. But according to the figures then, the federal government got some $5 billion in additional revenue and got about $1.1 billion additional revenue in the income tax. But let me point something out. George mentioned the differences here. Under Jimmy Carter, the tax burden as a percentage of the gross national product has reached the highest level in the history of our nation. It is also the highest percentage of personal income that it has ever been in our history. Now, under the President's revised 81 budget, the total federal taxes are projected as $628 billion. Of that, 283.1 will be individual income tax. That's a 115% increase in that tax since he took office. Now, over the next 10 years, if things aren't changed, it is estimated that the total tax increase on the people of America will be $1.5 trillion. Now, rather than the Kemp-Roth bill, which I support, the idea of a 10% cut across the board, the income tax, administered over a 3-year period to a total of 30%, I believe will stimulate the economy, will create jobs, but it will not reduce federal incomes. It will only reduce the increase in taxes, because we're going to be faced with an increase in taxes that is far beyond our comprehension right now. And if we figured that cut as a percentage of $628 billion, you would be reducing the first year less than 5%, perhaps about 4% in the total tax revenues that the government is going to be getting. But I believe at the same time, history has proven in all those other tax cuts, I believe that will stimulate the economy, more people will be working, and it will be contrary to the Carter policy now of fighting inflation by adding millions to the unemployment rolls. And so I support and stand by the idea of incentive taxes geared to the free enterprise system that will provide incentive to increase productivity so we can compete in the international market, which we can't do on even terms today.
I agree with that, but the difference we have is that it is my understanding the Kennedy tax cut implemented by Lyndon Johnson resulted in a $4.4 billion deficit. And inflation then was 1.8, not 18%. Investor confidence was high, not low. And it is my perception that that tax cut applied today in the same percentages, the same numbers, would result in a inflation rate of about 30 to 32%. And so I couldn't agree more about the percent of our gross national product taken by taxes. But I believe the first thing we must do is get in balance. Incidentally, not the way Jimmy Carter proposes, by higher and higher taxes. Get in balance by the reduction of expenditures, get in balance by a $20 billion supply side tax cut, and then begin to reduce rates. But if we risk, with investor confidence where it is, a deficit that's going to be up already, I think, $37 billion, $30 billion on top of that, I'm afraid we can't break inflation. And we've got to do that and do it fast.
Well, George, we've got to do that, and of course, it goes without saying. And I certainly believe in reducing the cost of government far more than the phony decrease that Mr. Carter has proposed. But when you suggested, as you have, about a $20 billion tax cut,
Right.
That is less than the federal government is going to get in a single year, undeserved, from people that just received cost of living pay raises and were pushed up into higher tax brackets. That amounts to more than $20 billion.
But if we get that in balance and then do what I say, start reducing the rates, that is the key thing. Your plan, in my judgment, and the judgment of many economists, would risk exacerbating that deficit. And today, our creditors abroad, our economy is linked to foreign economies. And they take a look at us and see us living at deficit after deficit. You cite the Kennedy tax cut. There wasn't any surplus then. There was a deficit resulted from that scheme. Arthur Laffer, the economist that proposed it, he himself says, I don't know whether it would work. I don't believe we can take that kind of risk, Governor.
Well, George,
and I would not propose it.
George, how much more risk is there in just going along with what we've been doing?
That's not what I've proposed. I've proposed something very different than just going along.
Let me just say one other thing. I've heard for a great many years that we can't possibly reduce taxes. This is Washington's cry.
I agree.
We can't reduce taxes until we reduce government spending. And I have to point out that government does not tax to get the money it needs. Government always needs the money it gets. Now, your son can be extravagant with his allowance, and you can lecture him day after day about saving money and not being extravagant, or you can solve the problem by cutting his allowance.
But the program I'm putting forward cuts the allowance, cuts on the spending side, but doesn't risk this promise everybody everything, because you cut taxes $210 billion, and you favor increasing defense, and you favor cutting out inheritance and gift taxes, and I believe that you're going to end up with a much bigger deficit. And that's where you and I differ. Listen, you talk to me about gross national product and percent of taxes. My whole program is based on getting tax relief. But I'm not going to do it in a way, popular though it may be, that's going to, in my view, make that deficit unsupported.
There's one last point I want to make, though.
Yeah.
There's one last point we haven't touched on. We're talking as if those dollars that are saved in taxes are not going to have any effect, the multiplier effect, when they're in the people's pockets and they're used out there in society. And it has been proven that there is a far greater multiplier effect and creation of prosperity in people spent, or money spent by the people and invested by the people, than there is when it is spent by government. And therefore, we've got to recognize that that money isn't going to be buried in a tin can in the backyard. It's going to be used to buy things, and when we buy things, productivity is going to increase. People are going to put it in a savings account. Then we're going to have the capital to invest in new plant and equipment and research and development. We have the highest percentage today of outmoded industrial plant and equipment of any of the industrial nations in the world. We can't compete evenly with them because we don't have the capital investment to put into business and industry.
That's why my cut is a supply-side tax cut. That's why I want to stimulate production.
You're getting close to something you agree on. I want to try and keep you from agreeing. Governor Reagan, there's a question that I have to ask you. The front runner always gets shot at more than anybody else. He's the point man, and there's a volley I must ask you about, and you should have a chance to answer. Many observers have said that many of the facts that you use in your arguments are wrong. You've spoken of the Kennedy 30% tax cut when it was really 18%.
No, that was the first year. It was a 2-year tax cut, Howard, and it was 27%, and I think that's close enough to round out to 30.
You have spoken of a government accounting office study showing either $11 billion or $50 billion waste in government, and the GAO says it doesn't have such a survey.
No, it turned out it was the Justice Department that gave that figure.
And you said that it cost the government $3 to provide $1 worth of benefits, and HEW says it cost 12 cents for a dollar of benefits.
And I wouldn't believe HEW if they were here in the room saying that.
There were several other facts like that cited. Do you dispute those, or you?
Well, I'd like to. Now, something just happened tonight. The UPI and a pretty good writer, Don Lambro, just has come out with a story that has to do with one set of figures I used about how many employees the Carter administration had added back. And it seems that one of the networks, which shall be nameless, went on the air, and they'd gone to a fellow in government to ask him, and he said, why, there were only 6,000 added in all these 3 years under the Carter administration. But Mr. Lambro goes on to say that while my figures might not have been fully accurate at this time, I appear to be closer to the mark. He says that in the last 3 years, the total number of government workers has grown by at least 63,282, not 6,000. I had said 131,000. But then he went on to point out that there are about 145,000 persons officially work for the Department of HEW. However, HEW is also paying the salaries of 1 million additional workers who labor for HEW in state and local governments, universities, consulting firms, and other organizations. Moreover, federal revenue pays the salaries of 77,000 state workers in the U.S. employment and unemployment offices around the country. All of these workers, who collectively add millions to the rolls, are excluded from the government's employee records. How much of their numbers increased over the last 3 years, no one knows, because no official count has ever been taken. When this is added to the nearly 5 million civilian and military employees on the government's official rolls, we see that as many as 14 million people are working for the government, and this means that at least one U.S. worker out of 8 owes his job to Washington. And he concludes saying, thus Reagan's 131,000 increase is perfectly possible and may in fact actually understate the real rise in federal employment.
All right, sir, you've covered that point. Now, how about the other points? Do you think that occasionally you do make a misstep?
Certainly. Anyone that's standing up without notes and ad-libbing answers to questions is going to slip up. One on some oil figures comparing Alaska and Saudi Arabia. The figures weren't wrong, but if all the things that I've read and I've studied and researched on that, I attributed them to the wrong report and gave U.S. Geological Survey the responsibility for having used those figures. And so again, they checked simply with U.S. Geological Survey, who said those figures weren't in our report. But I found that that's all I had done in that particular. What were some of those others you mentioned there? Because I've been waiting for an opportunity to do this.
$3.
I have confidence in the facts and figures that I've used.
I don't want to insist on them. You said it cost $3 to deliver $1 in benefits.
Well, I'll tell you, this one did appear in an account by an economist, and I will admit that not having any chance to check it with the economist, I took the figure that was used for redistribution of income outside of Social Security to people below the poverty level, and I took the figure of those below the poverty level and divided it into the total figure, and it came out that if the people below the poverty level were getting all of the money in that budget, a family of 4 would be receiving $27,000 a year, which is about 4 times as much as they're receiving, and I figured that made 3-to-1 overhead.
Let me...
you want to talk about that?
Yeah. In my view, what we ought to be is doing something about the employee thing. You know, Jimmy Carter fought the Leach Amendment that would have set a ceiling on federal employment through attrition. Nobody would have been thrown out of a job, but as people left, some would not be replaced. He fought against that. He campaigned on less people employed. I drove by the EOB the other day, and across from it is a building I am told is staffed, maybe some on temporary assignment, by people really working for the White House. White House staff is gone. They don't feel any of this recession. They don't feel any of these layoffs that the steel workers feel or felt, or some of the people around here are beginning to feel. And so that's what I do on that one. On energy, I don't believe, frankly, that there's enough oil in Alaska within the reasonable future to replace the 9 million barrels a day we get from overseas. I believe a decline curve has already set in on Alaskan oil. Some companies have already started pulling out of Alaska, and so my energy program is not just decontrol and figure we can get it all in Alaska, but it's to use alternate sources of energy, go with decontrol, of course, but to use alternate sources of energy as well.
Let me ask you both something that is just developing now, and that is that famous recession we've been waiting for, but which is now at last beginning to happen. It may be there when either of you may become president. What is your tendency, to let a recession go its length in the hope that it will reduce inflation, or try to halt recession by things like government expenditures or tax cuts that may stimulate inflation? Governor Reagan.
Well, I don't believe the alternative to inflation is recession. I think that's old-fashioned economics. I don't think that you have to trade unemployment. And incidentally, President Carter, as a candidate, said that he would never fight inflation by using unemployment. President Carter, in his present economic message, has said that as a part of his fight against inflation, unemployment is going to be allowed to go up 1 to 1.5 or 2 percentage points. Now, this is self-destructive, because for every single percentage point that you add to the unemployment rolls, you add $25 to $29 billion to the federal deficit, both in the loss of revenue from those no longer working and in the benefits that go out to them. No, I would do the things that I have talked about with regard to cutting of government, and I can point to some experience in the same situation. When I became governor of California, it was just like the federal government, bankrupt, and with a deficit, an amounting deficit. And I know that some of these things work. I would even go back to an example that happened since I was governor in California, Prop 13. Everyone in the country heard the horrifying tales of what was going to happen if they cut the property tax as much as Proposition 13 said they were going to. Well, it's been in effect about 18 months now. And the result is there are 100,000 fewer public workers. But the private sector in these 18 months has created 532,000 new jobs, and the state of California wound up with a $3 billion surplus.
Ambassador Bush?
I don't believe there is in economics a total soft landing. I don't believe it. It's not my concept of economics. I believe you are going to see some increase in unemployment, but sure. I believe the way you fight that is to stimulate capital formation, risk-taking, and production. And the way you do that is through this kind of approach to cutting taxes I talked about, as well as fighting the inflationary side by getting government spending under control. And I believe it would work. There are programs that will help for retraining. I like the idea of training people in the private sector for jobs that exist through tax credits, rather than train them up in a CETA program that gets some kid's hopes up. He really wants to work, gets his hopes up, and then there's no government job for him, or any job for him. Train him for jobs that don't exist. So I'm afraid you're going to see unemployment creep up. I would fight that by production, supply-side tax cuts, stimulating the private sector. And I believe that would work if you hold government under control. But you can't go and risk making the deficit bigger at the same time. Otherwise, you still have that inflationary. But my problem with Jimmy Carter, when he came in, he addressed himself to one thing: stimulation of employment sector and lowering unemployment. And he did that to some degree for a while, but inflation went right off the charts because of these reckless deficits.
Well, but he did other things to create the reckless deficits. He said that he was going to streamline government, and he streamlined it. He created the energy industry that's got a budget as big as the total profits of the major oil companies. He's now created the cabinet-level National Department of Education with more billions of dollars. He's got the biggest staff, as you pointed out, in the White House, I think, of any president that we know of. I think that he who was going to trim things, I laughed when he called Teddy Kennedy the biggest spender in the Senate. Well, he's the biggest spender that's ever been in the White House. And I feel when you said, again, stimulate, provide incentive for increased productivity, the American worker today is saving the lowest percentage of his earnings at any time in the last 30-odd years. And a Japanese worker can save 5 times the percentage of his earnings that an American can. A West German worker 3 times. It's that money that is not going into savings accounts, not going to insurance premiums, that is not there as capital to invest in the private sector. And the only capital investment they've been able to make has been mandated on them by this government to meet certain federal requirements, either in safety or environment or whatever. It's added to production costs, it's reduced productivity. And I want to see an increase in productivity too. And all I can say is I think the system you're talking about, we've been trying for a lot of years, really, off and on. And I think it is time for something new. And I think what is new is let's believe in the people once again and that they can spend their money smarter than the government can.
Let me ask you a question that is almost philosophical. Ladies and gentlemen, please suppress your enthusiasm until we're finished, because people will think someone's taking sides and we don't want them to think you are. Mr. Reagan and Ambassador Bush, you blame the government for many of our ills, but in many ways is not government absolutely essential, and hasn't it many achievements to its credit? The most productive industry we have is agriculture, and its productivity is due mainly to government activity and the research stations. The World War II, the government created an aluminum industry when private industry wouldn't touch it, and sold it then to private industry. And our most spectacular achievement lately, the putting a man on the moon, was a government project, a government plan, which private enterprise carried out. Aren't you underrating the effectiveness of government?
No. I don't think government adds to production. You can cite an example of the aluminum industry, now much better done in the private sector. And when you have a wartime economy, of course you're going to have government intervention in certain things. Stimulation of shipbuilding, for example. But you tell you what's happening. Government has moved in on the private sector with so much regulation. I built a business right here in Texas, started it from scratch. And when we started out there into the Gulf to drill a well, we needed, I think it was 2 permits. Today I'm told it's 12 permits. Every time you turn around, there is too much regulation. Yes, government does some things, and they can help people, and they do help people. And I'm not an anti-government people. And they provide for the defense, And there are certain functions that government has and that are compassionate and I think good. And I have a difference with the governors, whether you turn everything back to the states or not. Welfare, for example, I think there is room for a partnership there. But what government does is not productive. And we ought to be cutting it back because it isn't adding to this productivity that I think is essential if we're going to beat inflation and give the bypass citizen, the person in the 5th Ward of Houston that's been bypassed, give them an opportunity to have a running start as they get into the workforce.
Mr. Reagan?
Yes, Howard, I brought some figures along here because I thought they might come in handy someplace, and here it is. If Americans since 1950, in the last 30 years, had been able to save and invest, if our economy had grown only 1.5% more a year, our incomes would be 50% higher, jobs would be plentiful, we'd have a balanced budget, lower payroll taxes instead of higher, stable prices, a solvent Social Security program, and our industrial economy would be 3 times as great as that of the Soviet Union, and we would have unquestioned military superiority. Now, you mentioned, I agree too, there are legitimate functions government must perform. And the basic 3 that are outlined in the very basis of our government and our Constitution is that the government, the federal government, exists to protect us from outside aggression, our national security, to protect us from disorder within, and to guarantee the stability of our money. And in all 3 of those, at the moment, we could say this administration has failed. They have not protected our national security. They have let it decline to where we're in the most dangerous point we've been in that I can recall. We know about disorder in the streets and crime and so forth. And the 3rd one also, the stability of our money. The dollar is worth less in relation to other currency than it's ever been in our history.
Gentlemen, you both stated your viewpoints, and I want to move things on to another subject. There's supposed to be a 3rd man here tonight, Congressman John Anderson of Illinois. We received word he would not take part, and it's expected that tomorrow or perhaps the next day he will announce that he's forming a 3rd party and he will be the candidate. What do you think the effect of that will be on the election that you hope to take part in? I think Ambassador Bush.
Well, I don't really believe after the initial flurry that it's going to make that much difference. I believe that be more apt to pull from Jimmy Carter because his backing and those shoving him forward and helping him on this are those who I think would be for Teddy Kennedy if they thought he was going to be in there and have a shot. And so I don't view it. I don't think it'll be 3rd party. I think he'll run as an independent, and I think he'll have the same success that others have had that have run as independents. We are a 2-party system. Part of our stability comes from the 2-party system. I asked him in the debate in Illinois whether he was willing to support the nominee of the party. He made very clear then that he was not prepared so to state, and I think you're probably right that he will do this, but I don't believe it's going to amount to much. After the initial blush and a couple of good trips around the country, I don't see, he's caught. He's caught with, because he doesn't have really the true credentials of a Kennedy, and yet he seems to want to move away from the credentials that got him elected to the House. And that dichotomy, that contradiction is going to hurt him some, but let him do what he wants. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Governor will do what he wants. Governor Reagan, a poll the other day said that he could get 28% of the votes. I don't know whether the poll's accurate or not, but if he did, he could throw the election you hope to be in into the House of Representatives where the Democrats have a majority. Wouldn't that be a threat to you?
That would be a disaster. I think, I agree with George, though. I think whatever he's going to get, he's probably going to take away from the Carter side more than from our side. And I know that I speak for George when I say we sure do miss him tonight, don't we?
Gentlemen, let's turn to foreign affairs. Both of you have been unsatisfied with how the president has been handling the Iranian crisis lately, and now he apparently is having some thoughts of using force, which I think you've indicated in a general way you approve of. Let me run some forcible options past you and see whether you approve or disapprove. The most often quoted one is mining the oil ports of Persia, blockading the oil ports of Persia. Is there not a danger, if that were adopted, that the Russians would send minesweepers in to sweep the mines, or would run the blockade, and we'd have to either shoot or shut up? Do you find that, Governor Reagan, a danger?
Well, it's difficult to talk about what is a viable option now, as we're late in the 6th month of their captivity, because first of all is the fear of something that might endanger them further, but second is also, if you do have a good idea of something that should be done, I don't think we should say it out loud and let the Iranians hear about it. My criticism, I don't mind criticizing what has been done, and frankly, I don't think the president has done anything that he couldn't have done 5 months ago or longer. And then was the time to, when all the means of diplomacy failed, then was the time to look at the options, which only the president knows that he has, as to what he thought might, with the least chance of any violence, that might exert the greatest pressure on them, and then give them a date certain and say either the hostages are released on that date or this goes into effect. And he has used the term military force now as a possibility, but that could include what you've said, mining. It could include blockade. If we mined, and I'm sure those would be, if we did it, those would be the kind of mines that are activated by radio and can be deactivated, but we would have to also prevent Russian minesweepers from going in there and trying to take them out if they wanted to try that. I wonder whether they're prepared for a possible escalation of conflict with us at this time. They are aggressive against in Afghanistan and in Africa and so forth, and even though they have a lead on us in virtually everything, I don't think that maybe they're prepared at this time to dare the possible, well, they don't want the confrontation directly with the United States.
Wouldn't it be quite a risk to find out whether they were willing or not, Ambassador Bush, when they are operating just on the other side of the border from their supply depots, and we'll be operating 8,000 miles away from ours?
No, it would not be that big a risk in my judgment. I've been to that part of the Gulf. I did business in that part of the world. In my judgment, the situation in Iraq, where you see Iraq pulling away from the Soviet Union, has a bearing on this. In my judgment, the situation in Pakistan, where you have both China concerned and us concerned about Afghanistan for very different reasons. The Chinese with their special relationship with Pakistan, where you have Islam concerned, almost united in their concern about the Soviet, where you have a Soviet Union that is overcommitted in Afghanistan as it is. I don't believe your hypothesis is correct, Mr. Smith. I don't believe the Soviets would escalate. And I believe that is an option that the president should give very serious consideration to. And you're not talking when you get into a situation of mining, of having to seed it the way. Once you mine, it doesn't matter how many mines you put in, insurance rates skyrocket, and for all intents and purposes, commerce screeches to a halt. And I think it should be considered. I think it's for the president to make the determination. One thing I learned from my experience in foreign affairs is that there's a highly classified body of information that only a handful of people, properly in my judgment, have access to. And that's the president and a handful of his top people. And so if that decision is made by them, it would have my support. And I don't believe that the risk you cite is the risk to be concerned about. I think the risk would rather be internally in Iran, when you're dealing with outrageous, reckless people who have no respect for international law. They've already made a hostile act under any interpretation of international law, seizing our embassy. And so I wouldn't worry about the Soviets in this context for the reasons I've given you.
What about the option? What about the option of doing nothing at all? Clearly, the most important fact about Iran today is it's a country that hasn't completed its revolution. There are probably more pro-U.S. people in Iran than we realize from watching television and seeing only anti-U.S. militants. And if a showdown inside Iran, which has probably may have begun already with the students fighting one another, might see our side, the side that wants to get along with us, win. But if we use force, we may force Iran into Russian arms and endanger the hostages. Wouldn't it be worthwhile being patient a while longer, since the hostages are apparently physically in good condition?
I don't think they've seen it as patience. I think they've seen it as weakness. And they have no respect for us. They've humiliated us. One of their officials that we sent back just the other day, one of the diplomats, his speech when he arrived was boasting of how they've rubbed our face in the dirt all this time. But what if the United States had, in those first hours, had used all the diplomatic things that we've done? Not that commission from the UN, because that isn't even in the UN Charter, and I think it was a terrible precedent for us to set that the UN could do such a thing outside the Charter. But all the diplomatic efforts we could make peacefully to get them back, and then had used one of these, and let us say hypothetically, the mining of the harbor and the blockade. First of all, at that time, they were greatly dependent on outside commerce and dependent for about 30% of their food. Now they have adjusted, and for us to put sanctions on, our trade has shrunk down to the place that this is hardly going to affect them at all. But then, if we had done that forcefully, and in those first few days, and gotten our hostages back, then we could have said to them, now look, we don't want any trouble with you. We'd like to be friends with you. We'd like to work with you, and we could be helpful to you. And you've got a neighbor up north that's, I'm sure you don't want in here. And I think they would have listened to us. But now, why would they listen to us when they look to themselves as stronger than we are because of the way we've gone on month after month, letting this humiliation occur?
How about Afghanistan? Congressman Sam Stratton of New York, who's been to the Pakistan border with Afghanistan, says the Afghan rebels are using ancient weapons, rifles of World War I vintage, and he feels that we should send them very considerable aid, since the Russians are accusing us of it anyhow. Do you believe we should?
Absolutely. And I've said it from the very beginning. And look, if you're not going to, if you have a brutal aggression and you're not willing to help, and I think the way to do it was through Pakistan, if you're not willing to help, what possible hope do countries have that want to be free of this kind of aggression? You got to start in foreign policy with your definition of what the Soviet Union intends. Now, I believe the evidence is overwhelming that they seek superiority, not parity. And I believe when they see us weak, saying Cubans are in Africa as a stabilizing influence, they're going to go in there and use that stabilization to spread hegemony, as the Chinese would say. And so my view is that the Soviets are aggressive. They have overstated in Afghanistan. They have bitten off more than, in my judgment, they should be allowed to digest. And I think that the best answer to it is for them to know that the United States is going to keep its commitments. Our allies, everybody gripes about our allies. And yes, they ought to be out supporting us for what we've done. But they don't know that they can believe Jimmy Carter. They think that he's going to change his mind on whatever he does in the Mideast, just as he did on the enhanced radiation weapon in Germany.
It took him 3 years to find out that the Soviets couldn't be trusted. I agree completely that where people want to be free from Soviet or Cuban domination, where the proxy troops are used as the Cubans, the United States should be willing to provide weapons to any men that want to fight for their freedom against those hostile forces.
Do you believe, Governor Reagan, still that there should be a blockade of Cuba, a complete blockade?
Well, I suggested that as a hypothetical. Again, and it was in this, and it was based on this thing that we both have said here, and that is that only the president and a few people have knowledge of all the options. But I said, with regard to Afghanistan, and the president, I think, lowered the credibility of the United States when he made, in diplomatic language, what was an extremely serious warning to the Soviets not to invade Afghanistan. Indeed, he even used the term that serious consequences would follow. Now, he knew he had no way to back that up there. There wasn't anything we could do. We weren't going to put in troops and try to chase them out. So they invaded, and the world saw us once again still standing here, just as we're still standing after he made the speech that he wouldn't accept the Soviet brigade in Cuba. But we accepted it. And so my feeling is that what I said at the time was that we ought to have a plan. We ought to have a strategy of our own. We ought to have contingency plans where we can look ahead and say, well, if they should do this or do that, this is what we can do. And I propose that there might be pressures we could exert in the Soviet Union where the logistics are not 10,000 miles against us, but not in their backyard. And I said, let me give one hypothetical idea, and I said there may be others and better options than this. But here we have a Soviet satellite 90 miles off our shore. And instead of threatening sanctions or threatening the Olympics or anything else, why couldn't we blockade Cuba and then say to them, when your troops get out of Afghanistan, we'll drop the blockade around Cuba? And I think that this could exert great pressure.
You see, here we have a fundamental difference, because it wasn't Cubans that invaded Afghanistan, it was Russians. And we have a hemispheric problem today, it seems to me, and I believe that if you go back and look, blockade connotes in naval parlance war. Interdiction of shipping, interdiction of aircraft. Kennedy didn't use the word blockade, he used the word quarantine. To quarantine Cuba, it would require today, because of the decline in the United States Navy, according to a former chief of naval operations, the entire Atlantic fleet. Now, I don't believe, I have a difference with Governor Reagan. As much as I detest what Castro is doing, if Afghanistan were invaded or someplace in the Middle East were threatened when I was president, I would not respond against Cuba. I believe that would be bad in terms of the hemisphere. We got problems with Cuba, one-on-one on those problems. Don't link them in order to solve something halfway around the world. That's my view of foreign policy.
Well, then there's a disagreement in naval circles then too, because I had some naval advice about the practicality of the blockade also. But don't we have to realistically face up to the fact that our troubles in this hemisphere, in Central America and on down in South America, are being generated by Castro's Cuba, as well as in the Caribbean, where they are also threatening now to choke off our lifelines, and it's a problem that has to be faced one day. But I think that Russia has enough of a presence there. It has fighter bombers there. It has submarines there. It has a brigade we know about that holds combat maneuvers there. Russia provides, I guess, about a tanker a week with oil for Cuba. I don't think they could stand a blockade very long. And I think a little call on the hotline with this kind of a threat might get the withdrawal of the troops from Afghanistan, because it would be a pressure on them.
Ambassador Bush, what do we do about Cuba, which is, as everyone says, 90 miles off our border, is virtually a Soviet outpost, has an imitator now in the island of Grenada, has 500 advisors in Jamaica and some in Guyana, and the influence is spreading all the time. And what makes it seem ridiculous is it's a basket case of a nation about to collapse if Russia doesn't hold it up.
Right, but when Jimmy Carter came in, he gave a great big abrazo, stopped the SR-71 flights, and treated Cuba with civility while knocking the hell out of some of our allies in the further part of Latin America. And people look at us and they say, what's going on there? This man has made a conscious decision, in my judgment, Castro, to export revolution, not support it. Communists make this very interesting dialectic distinction between the support of revolution and the export. They've made this decision. And yes, Grenada is now having their alliance with Castro. Guyana has been in trouble before. Grenada first. Guyana has had their trouble before. Jamaica, their police and security forces being trained by Cuba. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. The rest of it is down in Central America today, where I am absolutely convinced that Castro is not only fomenting, but supplying the military equipment to stimulate revolution. So what do you do about it? You change your naive foreign policy that considers this guy as some kind of person that is really going to live comfortably inside that island. And then you adhere to human rights. The United States always must adhere to that. But Jimmy Carter didn't invent morality in foreign policy. And so what I would do is I would keep our strategic interests in mind as I push for equity and change.
Well, the next debate I'm going to ask you what you would do about Cuba, but now now we're going to have some questions from the audience.
Yes, my name is David Grossberg, and I'd like to know, do you think that children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free, or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
Who are you addressing that to?
I think you're first in this.
He was looking right at you.
I said he was. Look, I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs that problem wouldn't come up. But today, if those people are here, I would reluctantly say I think they would get whatever it is that they're, what the society is giving to their neighbors. But the problem has to be solved. The problem has to be solved because as we have kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law, and secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico. The answer to your question is much more fundamental than whether they attend Houston schools, it seems to me. I don't want to see if they're living here, I don't want to see a whole thing of 6- and 8-year-old kids being made, one totally uneducated and made to feel that they're living with outside the law. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people. Part of my family is a Mexican.
Can I add to that? I think the time has come that the United States and our neighbors, particularly our neighbor to the south, should have a better understanding and a better relationship than we've ever had. And I think that we haven't been sensitive enough to our size and our power. They have a problem of 40 to 50% unemployment. Now, this cannot continue without the possibility arising with regard to that other country that we talked about, of Cuba and what it is stirring up, of the possibility of trouble below the border, and we could have a very hostile and strange neighbor on our border. Rather than making them or talking about putting up a fence, why don't we work out some recognition of our mutual problems, make it possible for them to come here legally with a work permit, and then while they're working and earning here, they pay taxes here. And when they want to go back, they can go back, and they can cross and open the border both ways by understanding their problems. This is the only safety valve right now they have with that unemployment that probably keeps the lid from blowing off down there. And I think we could have a fine relationship, and it would solve the problem you mentioned also.
Yes, sir?
I'm Michael Appel, and I hope both of you gentlemen will address yourselves to this one. Local filling stations are said to be cutting the gasoline prices so as to exhaust their currently abundant supplies on the advice of their parent companies in order that their next allocations will not be decreased. How do you feel about this practice?
Is that one for me too?
I'll
be glad to respond.
I'll take a crack at it first, if you don't mind. Well, here again, this is part of what I think is the great energy crisis, like inflation, is caused by government. And part of it is from that energy agency and the allocation system. Once upon a time, the allocation of that product, like any other product, was made by the marketplace, supply and demand. Today, you have a government agency that is dictating where the gasoline, where the heating oil, where the diesel oil, where it will go, and trying to guess how much should go where. For example, recently, while you're talking about too much here, down in southern Florida, back during the primary there, they were running into a shortage because the agency had decided in the wintertime people drive less than they do in the summertime, and they didn't stop to think that it's summertime in South Florida all winter. And people were driving just as much, and probably even more people coming down there as tourists. California, when we lined up at the gas stations, they based our allocation on the 1972 figures. We've got 4 million more automobiles in California than we had in 1972. Let us turn the energy industry back and let the marketplace dictate things like that, and we won't have these problems.
The only thing I would add is that example makes a good case against wage and price controls. You've given a good example in the energy business. Energy department saying put the gasoline where the people aren't, back when we had a gasoline problem. And I oppose wage and price controls, and this is a good example of a price control that has distorted supply rather than helped, in my judgment.
Yes, ma'am?
Mr. Bush, Mr. Reagan, my name is Carla Manley, and I'd like to ask, with college costs up to $6,000 per year, even at state universities, would you okay tax cuts for families with college students? This is particularly important to students who are in middle-income families who are above financial need scholarships, but still feel the strain of college education.
I have supported, as a member of the United States Congress, tuition tax credits. How big they can be has to, in my judgment, be considered along with the entire economy. Because I don't want to stand here and say we're going to maximize, fund that to the fullest, when I'm talking cutting back on some kinds of of expenditures. But I favor tuition tax credits. I favor the student loan program. I don't favor abuses in the student loan program that permit people with a $100,000 income to get, families that way, to get loans at subsidized rates.
We're in agreement on that. I've supported the idea of tuition tax credits also, and the loan program. In California, we had a state scholarship program that was only $4 million when I became governor. It was 43 when I left. See, I had to wash dishes in the girls' dormitory to go to school. That was one of the better jobs I've had. But I agree with that, but isn't it basically, again, aren't we getting back to the first problem? That the answer is that, again, is a casualty of inflation. And until we get back down to common sense, reasonable prices, we're going to have these kind of problems.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bush, Mr. Reagan, I'm Robina Gore. Would you please tell us who some of the people are that you are considering as your vice presidential running mate when you are nominated?
I think this is Mr. Reagan's turn to start.
Gee, I thought I answered the other one first. Well, ma'am, I don't know what the answer is going to be from the other end of the stage, but I can tell you this one, whether it's fear of jinxing myself or whatever it is, I have refused to allow myself to even consider them. I think there's a wealth of talent in our party, and I have refused to let myself even turn my mind to that unless and until I am much closer to seeing the required number of delegates for the nomination.
Mr. Bush.
Even with my newfound optimism out of Pennsylvania, I have not gotten far enough along to think about the name of the person. Two criteria. He or she must be able to take over, the minute the president was incapacitated, and secondly, a certain degree of loyalty to the president's views. Not ideological conformity, not total agreement on every single one of these troubling issues that face this country, but a willingness to support the president. I'll be honest with you, and I don't agree with him on hardly any issue. Vice President Mondale has been a good vice president in this second regard for Jimmy Carter. Those are the two major criteria that I would look for.
Well, I must say also, it goes without saying, that I would think that anyone that you would recommend to the convention, you would have to feel would carry out the programs that you had promised the people you were going to implement. Therefore, whoever I picked would have to agree with the Kemp-Roth tax bill.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now we have about 1 minute for closing statement.
Mr. Roth, who's just come out for a $30 million tax cut, which is too bad.
3 seconds off your closing statement. A minute for your closing statement, Ambassador.
Well, I'm very pleased to be back in Texas. I'm looking forward to the campaign in this, my home state, where I've lived for 30 years. I believe that this kind of function, and I thank the League of Women Voters, is an extraordinarily good thing. Spell out the differences, spell them out so the voter can best determine who can beat Jimmy Carter. My view is this: if we have a sensible economic policy that does not overpromise, and we couple that with a foreign policy based on experience, where the United States will keep its word, strengthen its intelligence capability, and adhere to the values that have made us strong and earned us respect, we can help people at home, and we can restore the respect we've lost abroad. Thank you very much.
In the 18th century, we created here in this land the freest, most unique society that has ever been known to man. In the 19th century, we built the greatest industrial power that the world has ever seen, and we spent most of the 20th century apologizing. And I don't know what we're apologizing for. I think that living Americans today have fought harder, done more for the dignity of man than any people who've ever lived on this earth. And I also share the view that Jimmy Carter must be removed from office. If I thought someone else had a better chance to beat him than I did, I wouldn't be a candidate. I would be supporting that someone else. But in these last 20 years of this century, we must make sure that the young people and the people who are going to follow us will have the same opportunity, the same glittering opportunity that has been ours through 200 years of our history. It is all here, it is all possible to the American people, and I want to see the American people have that chance without government crowding them down and becoming the all-powerful instrument in their lives, controlling their destinies. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our forum for tonight. I want, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, to thank Ambassador Bush and Governor Reagan for being with us. They did agree on some very important things. I hope you kept note of that. But they didn't disagree as much as I wanted them to, which is very bad for showbiz, but probably very good for the Republican Party. The League of Women Voters believes that this forum series and its upcoming presidential debate series is vital to the interests of our nation, especially at this time. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you and good evening. The sponsor has been identified, but unlike most television programs, the performer hasn't been provided with a script. As a matter of fact, I have been permitted to choose my own words and discuss my own ideas regarding the choice that we face in the next few weeks. I have spent most of my life as a Democrat. I recently have seen fit to follow another course. I believe that the issues confronting us cross party lines. Now, one side in this campaign has been telling us that the issues of this election are the maintenance of peace and prosperity. The line has been used, we've never had it so good. But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future. No nation in history has ever survived a tax burden that reached a third of its national income. Today, 37 cents out of every dollar earned in this country is the tax collector's share. And yet our government continues to spend $17 million a day more than the government takes in. We haven't balanced our budget 28 out of the last 34 years. We've raised our debt limit 3 times in the last 12 months. And now our national debt is 1.5 times bigger than all the combined debts of all the nations of the world. We have $15 billion in gold in our treasury. We don't own an ounce. Foreign dollar claims are $27.3 billion. And we've just had announced that the dollar of 1939 will now purchase 45 cents in its total value. As for the peace that we would preserve, I wonder who among us would like to approach the wife or mother whose husband or son has died in South Vietnam and ask them if they think this is a peace that should be maintained indefinitely. Do they mean peace, or do they mean we just want to be left in peace? There can be no real peace while one American is dying someplace in the world for the rest of us. We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. Not too long ago, 2 friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. In this vote harvesting time, they use terms like the Great Society, or as we were told a few days ago by the President, we must accept a greater government activity in the affairs of the people. But they've been a little more explicit in the past, and among themselves, and all of the things I now will quote have appeared in print. These are not Republican accusations. For example, they have voices that say the Cold War will end through our acceptance of a not undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state. Or our traditional system of individual freedom is incapable of solving the complex problems of the 20th century. Senator Fulbright has said at Stanford University that the Constitution is outmoded. He referred to the President as our moral teacher and our leader, and he says he is hobbled in his task by the restrictions of power imposed on him by this antiquated document. He must be freed so that he can do for us what he knows is best. And Senator Clark of Pennsylvania, another articulate spokesman, defines liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Well, I, for one, resent it when a representative of the people refers to you and me, the free men and women of this country, as the masses. This is a term we haven't applied to ourselves in America. But beyond that, the full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those Founding Fathers, that outside of its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy. Now, we have no better example of this than government's involvement in the farm economy over the last 30 years. Since 1955, the cost of this program has nearly doubled. 1/4 of farming in America is responsible for 85% of the farm surplus. 3/4 of farming is out on the free market and has known a 21% increase in the per capita consumption of all its produce. You see, that 1/4 of farming, that's regulated and controlled by the federal government. In the last 3 years, we've spent $43 in the feed grain program for every dollar bushel of corn we don't grow. Senator Humphrey last week charged that Barry Goldwater, as president, would seek to eliminate farmers. He should do his homework a little better, because he'll find out that we've had a decline of 5 million in the farm population under these government programs. He'll also find that the Democratic administration has sought to get from Congress extension of the farm program to include that 3/4 that is now free. He'll find that they've also asked for the right to imprison farmers who wouldn't keep books as prescribed by the federal government. The Secretary of Agriculture asked for the right to seize farms through condemnation and resell them to other individuals. And contained in that same program was a provision that would have allowed the federal government to remove 2 million farmers from the soil. At the same time, there's been an increase in the Department of Agriculture employees. There's now 1 for every 30 farms in the United States. And still, they can't tell us how 66 shiploads of grain headed for Austria disappeared without a trace, and Billy Sol Estes never left shore. Every responsible farmer and farm organization has repeatedly asked the government to free the farm economy. But who are farmers to know what's best for them? The wheat farmers voted against a wheat program. The government passed it anyway. Now the price of bread goes up, the price of wheat to the farmer goes down. Meanwhile, back in the city, under urban renewal, the assault on freedom carries on. Private property rights so diluted that public interest is almost anything a few government planners decide it should be. In a program that takes from the needy and gives to the greedy, we see such spectacles as in Cleveland, Ohio, a $1.5 million building completed only 3 years ago must be destroyed to make way for what government officials call a more compatible use of the land. The president tells us he's now going to start building public housing units in the thousands, where heretofore we've only built them in the hundreds. But FHA and the Veterans Administration tell us they have 120,000 housing units they've taken back through mortgage foreclosure. For 3 decades, we've sought to solve the problems of unemployment through government planning, and the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan. The latest is the Area Redevelopment Agency. They've just declared Rice County, Kansas, a depressed area. Rice County, Kansas has 200 oil wells, and the 14,000 people there have over $30 million on deposit in personal savings in their banks. When the government tells you you're depressed, lie down and be depressed. We have so many people who can't see a fat man standing beside a thin one without coming to the conclusion the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one. So they're going to solve all the problems of human misery through government and government planning. Well, now, if government planning and welfare had the answer, and they've had almost 30 years of it, shouldn't we expect government to read the score to us once in a while? Shouldn't they be telling us about the decline each year in the number of people needing help, the reduction in the need for public housing? But the reverse is true. Each year, the need grows greater, the program grows greater. We were told 4 years ago that 17 million people went to bed hungry each night. Well, that was probably true. They were all on a diet. But now we're told that 9.3 million families in this country are poverty-stricken on the basis of earning less than $3,000 a year. Welfare spending 10 times greater than it was in the dark depths of the Depression. We're spending $45 billion on welfare. Now, do a little arithmetic, and you'll find that if we divided the $45 billion up equally among those 9 million poor families, we'd be able to give each family $4,600 a year. And this, added to their present income, should eliminate poverty. Direct aid to the poor, however, is only running about $600 per family. It would seem that someplace there must be some overhead. So now we declare war on poverty, or you too can be a Bobby Baker. Now, do they honestly expect us to believe that if we add $1 billion to the $45 billion we're spending, one more program to the 30-odd we have, and remember, this new program doesn't replace any, it just duplicates existing programs, do they believe that poverty is suddenly going to disappear by magic? Well, in all fairness, I should explain there is one part of the new program that isn't duplicated. This is the youth feature. We're now going to solve the dropout problem, juvenile delinquency, by reinstituting something like the old CCC camps. And we're going to put our young people in these camps. But again, we do some arithmetic, and we find that we're going to spend each year, just on room and board for each young person we help, $4,700 a year. We can send them to Harvard for $2,700. Of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting Harvard is the answer to juvenile delinquency. But seriously, what are we doing to those we seek to help? Not too long ago, a judge called me here in Los Angeles. He told me that a young woman who'd come before him for a divorce. She had 6 children, was pregnant with her 7th. Under his questioning, she revealed her husband was a laborer earning $250 a month. She wanted the divorce to get an $80 raise. She's eligible for $330 a month in the Aid to Dependent Children program. She got the idea from 2 women in her neighborhood who'd already done that very thing. Yet any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals. They say we're always against things, we're never for anything.
More from President Reagan's address after this message.
The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation is the nonprofit organization created by President Reagan himself, and specifically charged by him with continuing his legacy and sharing his principles: individual liberty, economic opportunity, global democracy, and national pride. We must remain vigilant and work together to share these conservative principles with younger generations. Your role is critical to move our mission forward. Thank you for your continued support. Please visit reaganfoundation.org/give. That's reaganfoundation.org/give.
Now, back to President Reagan.
Well, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Now, We're for a provision that destitution should not follow unemployment by reason of old age. And to that end, we've accepted Social Security as a step toward meeting the problem. But we're against those entrusted with this program when they practice deception regarding its fiscal shortcomings, when they charge that any criticism of the program means that we want to end payments to those people who depend on them for a livelihood. They've called it insurance to us in 100 million pieces of literature. But then they appeared before the Supreme Court and they testified it was a welfare program. They only used the term insurance to sell it to the people. And they said Social Security dues are a tax for the general use of the government. And the government has used that tax. There is no fund. Because Robert Byers, the actuarial head, appeared before a congressional committee and admitted that Social Security as of this moment is $298 billion in the hole. But he said there should be no cause for worry, because as long as they had the power to tax, they could always take away from the people whatever they needed to bail them out of trouble. And they're doing just that. A young man, 21 years of age, working at an average salary, his Social Security contribution would in the open market buy him an insurance policy that would guarantee $220 a month at age 65. The government promises $127. He could live it up until he's 31 and then take out a policy that would pay more than Social Security. Now, are we so lacking in business sense that we can't put this program on a sound basis so that people who do require those payments will find they can get them when they're due, that the cupboard isn't bare? Barry Goldwater thinks we can. At the same time, can't we introduce voluntary features that would permit a citizen who can do better on his own to be excused upon presentation of evidence that he had made provision for the non-earning years? Should we not allow a widow with children to work and not lose the benefits supposedly paid for by her deceased husband? Shouldn't you and I be allowed to declare who our beneficiaries will be under this program, which we cannot do? I think we're for telling our senior citizens that no one in this country should be denied medical care because of a lack of funds. But I think we're against forcing all citizens, regardless of need, into a compulsory government program, especially when we have such examples as was announced last week when France admitted that their Medicare program is now bankrupt. They've come to the end of the road. In addition, was Barry Goldwater so irresponsible when he suggested that our government give up its program of deliberate planned inflation so that when you do get your Social Security pension, $1 will buy $1's worth and not 45 cents worth? I think we're for an international organization where the nations of the world can seek peace. But I think we're against subordinating American interests to an organization that has become so structurally unsound that today you can muster a 2/3 vote on the floor of the General Assembly among nations that represent less than 10% of the world's population. I think we're against the hypocrisy of assailing our allies because here and there they cling to a colony, while we engage in a conspiracy of silence and never open our mouths about the millions of people enslaved in the Soviet colonies in the satellite nations. I think we're for aiding our allies by sharing of our material blessings with those nations which share in our fundamental beliefs. But we're against doling out money government to government, creating bureaucracy, if not socialism, all over the world. We set out to help 19 countries. We're helping 107. We've spent $146 billion. With that money, we bought a $2 million yacht for Haile Selassie. We bought dress suits for Greek undertakers, extra wives for Kenya government officials. We bought 1,000 TV sets for a place where they have no electricity. In the last 6 years, 52 nations have bought $7 billion worth of our gold, and all 52 are receiving foreign aid from this country. No government ever voluntarily reduces itself in size, so government programs once launched never disappear. Actually, a government bureau is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. Federal employees number 2.5 million, and federal, state, and local, 1 out of 6 of the nation's workforce employed by government. These proliferating bureaus with their thousands of regulations have cost us many of our constitutional safeguards. How many of us realize that today federal agents can invade a man's property without a warrant? They can impose a fine without a formal hearing, let alone a trial by jury, and they can seize and sell his property at auction to enforce the payment of that fine. In Chico County, Arkansas, James Weir overplanted his rice allotment. The government obtained a $17,000 judgment, and a U.S. Marshal sold his 960-acre farm at auction. The government said it was necessary as a warning to others to make the system work. Last February 19th at the University of Minnesota, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said if Barry Goldwater became president, he would stop the advance of socialism in the United States. I think that's exactly what he will do. But as a former Democrat, I can tell you Norman Thomas isn't the only man who has drawn this parallel to socialism with the present administration. Because back in 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, a great American, came before the American people and charged that the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road under the banners of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And he walked away from his party and he never returned till the day he died. Because to this day, the leadership of that party has been taking that party, that honorable party, down the road in the image of the Labor Socialist Party of England. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. Every businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. Our Democratic opponents seem unwilling to debate these issues. They want to make you and I believe that this is a contest between two men, that we're to choose just between two personalities. Well, what of this man that they would destroy? And in destroying, they would destroy that which he represents, the ideas that you and I hold dear. Is he the brash and shallow and trigger-happy man they say he is? Well, I've been privileged to know him when. I knew him long before he ever dreamed of trying for high office. And I can tell you personally, I've never known a man in my life I believed so incapable of doing a dishonest or dishonorable thing. This is a man who, in his own business, before he entered politics, instituted a profit-sharing plan before unions had ever thought of it. He put in health and medical insurance for all his employees. He took 50% of the profits before taxes and set up a retirement program, a pension plan for all his employees. He sent monthly checks for life to an employee who was ill and couldn't work. He provides nursing care for the children of mothers who work in the stores. When Mexico was ravaged by the floods in the Rio Grande, he climbed in his airplane and flew medicine and supplies down there. An ex-GI told me how he met him. It was the week before Christmas during the Korean War. And he was at the Los Angeles airport trying to get a ride home to Arizona for Christmas. And he said that a lot of servicemen there and no seats available on the planes. And then a voice came over the loudspeaker and said, any men in uniform wanting a ride to Arizona, go to runway such and such. And they went down there. There was a fellow named Barry Goldwater sitting in his plane. Every day in those weeks before Christmas, all day long, he'd load up the plane, fly it to Arizona, fly them to their homes, fly back over to get another load. During the hectic split-second timing of a campaign, this is a man who took time out to sit beside an old friend who was dying of cancer. His campaign managers were understandably impatient, but he said there aren't many left who care what happens to her. I'd like her to know I care. This is a man who said to his 19-year-old son, there is no foundation like the rock of honesty and fairness. And when you begin to build your life on that rock, with the cement of the faith in God that you have, then you have a real start. This is not a man who could carelessly send other people's sons to war. And that is the issue of this campaign that makes all the other problems I've discussed academic. unless we realize we're in a war that must be won. Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution of peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. And they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us. All who oppose them are indicted as warmongers. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. Not an easy answer, but simple. If you and I have the courage to tell our elected officials that we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right, we cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters. Alexander Hamilton said, a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? Well, Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side, he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better read than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. This is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
The time for choosing speech really did help launch Ronald Reagan's career, first as governor of California, then as president of the United States. Thank you for listening. For more information on the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, including information on how to become a member, information on upcoming exhibits at the Reagan Library, or more information on the legacy of President Reagan, please visit reaganfoundation.org. And don't forget to like and follow the Reagan Foundation on all social media platforms.
Everything's up on the bar. We're all in. We get to decide. Do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to die on your feet fighting? That's the decision you get to make now.